together with Lowan Stewart, who's joining us from Oslo. And we'll be talking about ketamine and the really interesting developments that are happening in Norway around this. And as you notice, I'm speaking English, and that's because Lowan is still working on his Scandinavic. But I hope
I do speak Norwegian, but the Swedish Norwegian thing is still a little difficult. So better for the audience as well.
Yeah. We will be talking for about 45 minutes, and then we will be joined by a Swedish psychiatry resident, Alexandra Leinonen, who will share a little bit about the work she's doing in Sweden. And then we'll have the last half hour for a Q&A session with both Lowan and Alexandra. So without further ado, I want to welcome you, Lowan. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here and talk to you.
So you've been working in Norway for quite a few years, but you're originally from New Mexico, is that right?
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background? I know you grew up in a very psychedelic environment.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to try to shorten it up a little bit. Yeah, I was born in the Rocky Mountains in rural Colorado, born on a hippie commune called Libre, Freedom, and born on a bus called the Cannabus. was literally born on the Cannabus. Later moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where there's quite a psychedelic culture and history in New Mexico, both pre-American history and current. It was sort of pivotal during the 60s. Timothy Leary was living in New Mexico. So psychedelics were always part of the culture. Peyote use is ritual peyote use is common there. Psilocybin mushroom use. I never really thought of it as anything interesting or unusual because it was just part of the culture that I grew up in. I was in medical school when Rick Strassman was at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, and he was doing his DMT study while I was there. So I had a friend in the first DMT study. But at that,
90s, or early 90s.
Yeah, early 90s. So there was stuff happening. At that time, I was more interested in neuroscience. So I had come out of college studying anthropology, physical anthropology, the evolution of humans, primates, our primate evolution. And I was studying the evolution of laughter in college, tickling chimpanzees. That's what I did my thesis on. And later started neuroscience, was very interested in the connection between the mind and the body, and particularly the evolution of emotions. Ended up going into medicine after that, and did emergency medicine for the majority of my career. So did that for 17 years, which is somewhat relevant for two reasons. One, in the US, emergency physicians train psychiatrists in emergency psychiatry. So we take care of the first kind of 12 to 24 hours of all psychiatric emergencies. And the other part is that as an emergency physician, you're using anesthetics, so doing small surgeries and doing anesthesia. So we're very accustomed to using ketamine, and that was sort of how a lot of emergency doctors got into this in the early days. Came to Norway about 15 years ago with a Norwegian wife, and continued to work in the US, but because of the differences in the system, I was looking for something else to do here, since I couldn't do the type of work that I did in the US. Did a master's in public health, and was quite really impressed by the global burden of mental health disorders. How much of the suffering in the world that is due to depression and other mental health disorders and addiction. And so I wanted to do something interesting in that area, and started looking into the current research that was going on at the time, and sort of dove into the psychedelic renaissance and studies that were being done on old psychedelics, and that's how I came to ketamine, and started initially a ketamine clinic in the US in 2016, and then 2 years later opened one in Norway, and that sort of began the process, that the Norwegian process that we've had over the last almost decade. Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit in broad terms about the research on ketamine in the context of psychiatry? When did it sort of begin, and when did it take off?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, a lot of people think that it's a relatively new thing in psychiatry, which, for many people it is, but in many countries it is. But so ketamine was synthesized in 1962 as an alternative to angel dust, phenylcyclidine, as an anesthetic. It was tested on humans in 1964 on prisoners, and even in that first report on healthy controls of prisoners, they reported improved mood the next day after the dosing. And these are, prisoners have anxiety and depression, and but that really wasn't picked up on at that time. 1970, it was approved as an anesthetic by the FDA, and shortly after all over the world. And 1970 was the year that, around that time, kind of all the psychedelic research was shut down in the US and globally. And so you have all these people, using psychedelics in psychotherapy and psychiatry, thousands of, papers, studies being done. And all of a sudden you can't work with this stuff anymore in other than underground. Same year.
MDMA didn't exist yet.
Not at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or not in the popular,
Right. And so you have this approved medicine that, from day one, we knew it had psychedelic properties. And you can get into, how you define a psychedelic, but the experience can be definitely psychedelic. And so we knew that. So it was very quickly after, many psychologists, doctors throughout the world started using ketamine in their practice, following the psychedelic model that had been developed in the 50s, 60s. And so the first report of ketamine use in psychiatry, the published report, was actually in 1973 from Shiraz in Iran, and showing positive effects with affective disorders, anxiety disorders, and discussing the psychedelic properties and how they could be used and useful in psychotherapeutic work. So it was there, but kind of remained relatively not not mainstream at all until the 90s, when they were doing, one other place they did a lot of work was in St. Petersburg. Yevgeny Krupitsky did work using ketamine for the treatment of substance use disorders. But then in the 90s, they, at the at initially Yale, they were looking at sort of the neurobiology of psychosis, and we're using ketamine as a model to, maybe we could learn more about the etiology of schizophrenia and other psychosis, and started doing work there. And then finally in 2000 was the first randomized controlled trial of that was ever done for initially ketamine for treatment-resistant depression, showing rapid antidepressant effects on the course of hours, which was a breakthrough. And since then, there's just been, hundreds of studies done since that time, both on depression and a variety of other disorders.
But the wide use in psychiatry is quite new. I mean, relatively new.
Absolutely.
When did the first ketamine clinics and ketamine, I guess there must be even ketamine units of American hospitals.
Yeah. So after 2000, it was it wasn't until the problem was that ketamine is a generic drug, so there's no financial incentive, no drug companies doing any research. So it was Yale, they did some studies long, years after that initial one, replicated it, replicated it in bipolar depression. And then the National Institute of Mental Health started doing some studies. So, publicly funded research on ketamine, because that was the only way to do the studies. It wasn't until 2017 that the American Psychiatric Association published a consensus document, kind of that there is evidence. We believe that there's evidence that it has a rapid antidepressant effect. It appears to be effective, supporting the use of ketamine for treatment-resistant depression. So after that time, that was 2017, but it was probably around 2010 when ketamine clinics were popping up. When I started in 2016, it was the first clinic in the state of New Mexico. There were about 30 or 40 private clinics in the country at that time. And it was, we were all kind of learning from each other. We had a internet group all over, globally, where there was just literally less than 50 people that were talking about how to do things and do them in the best way. And then that's just expanded. So initially they weren't doing it in the public hospitals. Now, pretty much every major hospital in the US is providing ketamine for depression. A lot of them have dedicated ketamine units. Harvard has a ketamine unit, UCLA, many have dedicated units, and there's over 1,000 private clinics in the US. And but it's taken longer to sort of spread throughout the world. When I first started in Norway in 2018, it was, other than inpatient hospital units, usually ECT, electroshock therapy units, doing an occasional treatment here and there, or doing a clinical trial. It was me, Rupert McShane at Oxford, and a guy in Madrid. That was it, who had, clinics, sort of ketamine clinics. But that's changed rapidly, and now there's a lot of countries in Europe doing it. There's consensus guidelines from from Canada, from Australia, New Zealand, Poland. Yeah.
So I want to come back to the sort of the social aspect and the societal aspect, but I'd like to just stop for a second and talk a little bit about the different ways or the different approaches, because I mean ketamine is such an interesting example, because on the one hand there are clinicians like you who I identify as a psychedelic therapist and see this as a psychedelic therapy, and then you have people in white lab coats that would say all subjective effects are side effects.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting. So, the current research that's going on with classic psychedelics and MDMA, they just picked up where we left off, right? So it was kind of psychedelic model with all the components of the psychedelic model that we're familiar with, a lot of preparation, attention to the set and setting and music, and appreciation for and utilization of subjective effects, integration, all that. So those are sort of almost default into all, even psychedelic research is being done at major hospitals, not psychedelic research or just little clinics where people could do whatever they want. So it's sort of the default with the others. What happened with ketamine was that, so one, it was already in the biomedical system. So it's an approved anesthetic. It's available in every hospital in the world. We use it for anesthesia, and it's sort of considered just an anesthetic. And being in that model, so when I give ketamine for somebody with a gunshot wound, for example, there is no preparation, there is no set and setting. It's, I'm going to give you a medicine, boom, and then I give you benzodiazepines so you don't remember the crazy trip you had while you got shot in the chest, right? So it's an entirely different approach, and they have those same experiences, but we minimize the subjective experience because that's not why we're giving the ketamine. So that's where it came out of. That's where 90% of the literature on ketamine is in anesthesia and emergency medicine. And the other, there were these two. So like I said, there was a psychedelic model. And it had, it was continuously used. So, one of the early pioneers, Philip Wolfson in California, has used it forever. George Greer, the founder of Hefter, used it, in the 80s for a lot of things. And I actually worked with both of them when I was setting up the initial clinic. But so there was that, so it broke off, and there were some people doing the psychedelic model, and then the biomedical, how ketamine was used in the hospital was very biomedical. And then when that research started coming out, it was in the hospital with the biomedical model, not informed by all the other stuff that was going on. Or, if they knew about it, it was kind of disregarded, and we're just focusing, this is a rapidly acting antidepressant. It has these, neurobiologic effects, and we minimize the subjective experience, or just, either don't talk about it, minimize it, call it a side effect, call it psychotomimetic, stimulating psychosis, just delirium, whatever you want to call it. So sort of negative association with any of this subjective effect. And even positive experiences, euphoria, calling that a side effect, because then it could be, maybe it could be a little addictive, so we want to minimize that as well, and not, that's a side effect if they feel a sense of love or whatever. So then, as it becomes more and more used, and we get more data and more experience, those two models are slowly approaching each other. And people who have experience with this are finding that you really get the best outcomes for the patients if we sort of merge those models together. And that's a psychedelic informed approach that acknowledges that, yes, this is a drug, that an NMDA receptor antagonist that has all these neurobiologic effects and effects on various brain networks. And there's all this biology that does happen. But in addition to that, there's very powerful experiences that can be very useful. And using some of what we've learned from the history of psychedelic research and treatment, by combining those, you make people's experiences better. It's safer. They have less side effects when you do that. So, preparation, integration, attention to the experience, and doing things like eye shades, and having music, and paying attention to the surroundings around the whole process. So what I think, what we came to in Norway over years was very similar to what Kyle Greenway and colleagues in Montreal call the Montreal model, which is just taking the best of both of those to get the best positive outcomes we can. And that's, so we sort of both, with experience over the years, came to the same place. And we were quite lucky in Norway that I had sort of made the process towards that before we implemented it in the public health system. Because then you sort of have a founder effect, because this is the way we're doing it. So that's the way we started. In a lot of other countries, they start with the biomedical model, just that, and they're, having difficulties with that. And you have to sort of then add on, maybe it would be a little better if you paid attention, if you didn't have these bright lights, or if you,
That's where we are in Sweden, as we have spoken about, and I'm sure you've heard. But there are a lot of healthcare professionals in Sweden that would say, ketamine for depression, oh, we've tried it, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Patient got anxious.
Yeah.
And I've also met many patients who develop panic attacks.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've known this for decades, that, I mean, if you're in the wrong setting, it can be really uncomfortable, and you can have a bad experience. And we know that about all psychedelics. But, with ketamine, that's, we treat that with benzodiazepines, and, yeah.
So what does a typical treatment process look like at Axonklinikken?
So in the private clinics, we have, so there's a screening, initial screening exam, psychiatric and medical screening exam, to see if the person is a good candidate for the treatment. Then they have usually a couple hours of preparation with one of the psychologists at the clinic, or whoever will be doing the process with them. and to prepare them for it. And then we do usually 4 to 6 treatments over the course of a month. So, for example, weekly treatments for a month. And each visit is a little time before the ketamine experience, and a little time after. So most people have about 2.5 hours, with one of that hour being the ketamine experience, where it's primarily an internal experience without so much interaction, unless there's a need for support during the process. And the integration psychotherapy that we do is kind of happening on either end of that. So if you had ketamine treatment last week, then you've got some time to talk about what happened before, and then you do the treatment, and then have time afterwards to integrate. We use ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, as sort of the ground foundation for the psychotherapy that we do with our patients, bringing in other things if needed for a specific indication or a specific patient. And then so after kind of 4 to 6 initial treatments, you do multiple treatments, because not everybody responds to the first dose. We optimize the dose, so we're changing the dose based on the effect for the person. And you also increase the durability of the positive effects by doing repeat treatments. And then after that, we do an evaluation about 3 weeks after the last initial ketamine dose, to decide where to go from there. Some people do not, they don't need any further treatment. Other people do it as needed. If something happens in their life that they kind of fall back into some negative patterns, they come back. And there are some people that benefit from a longer period of ketamine maintenance, where they do like monthly treatment for a period of time. It could be 6 months, could be a year. Yeah, we could talk more about specific populations or disorders as well, but that's our general model.
So there's been some reports of dependency, and it's definitely one of the main risks with ketamine, especially if in a country like the US, which, as you mentioned, has over 1,000 clinics, and sort of a Wild West unregulated system where ketamine clinics can actually even send ketamine home to people's homes and do ketamine telemedicine. So what do you think of the risks? Are you worried that your patients will be dependent on ketamine?
No, but it's a really good question. So first of all psychoactive medications that cause an altered state of consciousness have abuse liability. So humans like to alter their consciousness and have done so since we've been human. And there's, so if you take any drug, any medical drug that we, use in medicine, whether it's opiates, benzodiazepines, amphetamines that we use for ADHD, all of these medicines can be used in a clinical setting where they have relatively low risk if done in the appropriate setting and under supervision. But they all have risk for addiction. The risk for addiction with ketamine is actually very low compared to opiates, benzodiazepines, amphetamines. However, if you use ketamine very low doses, so in recreational use, the recreational dose of ketamine is much lower than the doses that we use for the treatment of depression. In that recreational setting where people are going dancing and they take a little ketamine and it makes them feel a little different, and that people can start using more frequently. And if you use it more frequently, then you get a tolerance. And if you once you get a tolerance in higher doses, you can have side effects like bladder problems, kidney problems, liver problems. The cognitive deficits, it's a little unclear because the only data we have on neurotoxicity with ketamine abuse is from polysubstance users. So, they're also taking cocaine and meth and alcohol and, but the point is, when you're doing it in a medically supervised manner, it's incredibly rare. So there's actually only case reports of now it's obviously highly underreported. There's probably tons of clinics that they don't gather data on it, but it's very rare for people when doing ketamine for treatment of a mental health disorder to become addicted. It's not actually physically possible by the frequency of dosing that we do. So you just can't become tolerant and you don't become addicted. But there are cases where, for example, people can't afford it. So they then try to self-medicate and they're not doing it under supervision, and they do take it more frequently than we would do it, and then they can have problems. So it definitely happens, and it is a risk of anything that when there's more awareness, that people find out that you read about, there's a lot of things in the media about ketamine for depression, for PTSD, for all these other things. And it increases awareness, and people are more likely to try that recreationally or self-medication wise. So it definitely is going to, the incidence of that is going to increase. But then the question is, well, what's the option? I mean, we're not going to not treat people who are suffering greatly because some people will misuse that. And the people that are misusing it are doing it anyway. But it's something to be aware of. It's not a problem in clinical use. And the other thing, just to comment on it, is the thing about the low dose versus high dose. Just like powerful psychedelic experiences, most people, not all, but most people say, wow, it could have been amazing, but it's not something that they want to do like tomorrow. Maybe next month I'll try it again, or in a couple months. And that's what the very deep ketamine experiences are like. They're not all euphoric too. That's the other thing, is that unlike benzos or opiates, or, that if anybody takes heroin, it feels good. No matter what, right? Ketamine doesn't feel anything. It just opens the door, and it can be incredibly powerful and beautiful and loving and euphoric experience, or it could be really dark and chaotic and scary. So it's not a reliable, at the doses we use in the clinic, it's not a reliable dopamine stimulator, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear. So I want to take it a little bit towards implementation. One of the reasons that I find this fascinating is, of course, that there's a hope that implementing ketamine can help us to implement other psychedelics better if we if we on a societal scale can learn about set and setting and have dedicated clinics, then we will be more ready to implement psilocybin or MDMA when or if that becomes approved. So can you share a little bit about what's happening in Norway, and what are your hopes for the coming year or so?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, you're totally right. And I've been trying to communicate this for a long time. There's been, everybody was so excited about MDMA and psilocybin, and we're making so much progress and we're almost there. And ketamine was just sort of on the sidelines. Nobody really talked about it. It wasn't at, very rarely talked about at the big psychedelic conferences. Even though it's like the biggest thing at the psychiatric conferences. So if we can't implement ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in our public health systems, we're so far from implementing the other things, even when they're approved. So it's not only a stepping stone. It's really critical. We have to, we have an approved medicine that we've used for 50 years that we know is safe, that is a powerful rapid antidepressant effect. If we can't get that and do that right and make that available to people in a public health system, then we're going to have a lot of problems with the other stuff. So, and it's also, it's kind of like, you have all that, plus it's only a 1 hour psychedelic experience, then they're totally fine, can leave, can go take a tram. It doesn't have the time factor that psilocybin and MDMA do, which is going to be an additional sort of stressor on the resources of the health systems. So, and the other thing is that everything that we do with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy is relatively the same as with MDMA or with psilocybin. Yes, there's a little bit of differences in sort of interaction during the experience, and there's the time, but ultimately all the pieces need to be in place. They need to be really well prepared and screened. You need to pay attention to the set and setting, the importance of integration and leveraging all the positive things and integrating psychotherapy with it. So what we did in Norway was, it was always my intention. I've never worked in private practice before I moved to Norway. So I worked in an emergency department in a public hospital my whole career. So when I brought the ketamine treatment to Norway, I went to the Psychiatric Association, went to the health directorate. I talked to them. I said, I've been doing this for a couple of years in the US. I've seen, hundreds of patients radically change their lives. I have all the data. Here's the studies that have been done. This is what we've got right now. We just had a consensus report from the American Psychiatric Association, and nobody was interested at all. So the purpose from the very beginning was to implement it in the public health system. That didn't work. I had to show the evidence to the medical board, to the Psychiatric Association. In 2020, we were able to open the first public ketamine unit at Sykehuset Østfold here south of Oslo, as kind of a pilot program, but the program was treatment. So not a research study, but treatment. Since that time, we've treated over, I think it's somewhere around 400 people there in the public unit with treatment-resistant depression. So that it was a process of education, communication, talking to people, showing them the data. There's a lot of stigma about, most doctors and definitely psychiatrists, they or and psychologists, they hear ketamine, they think some rave drug. They don't even know, many didn't even know that it was a medicine, that it's an approved medicine that we can use off-label for depression. So
and that
there's
we give to kids as well. And that we give to kids.
Yeah, exactly. Give it to a 5-year-old and I give 10 times the dose, the antidepressant dose to a 5-year-old, and and fix their arm and let them go home. So so it's an incredible amount of education. It was, the critical thing is getting it into the public system, because that was sort of a legitimacy. So up until that time, it was crazy American ER doc doing some crazy thing in a private clinic. But then when we open the public unit, then everybody's like, oh, the public hospital, they're doing this, then it must be okay. So that was critical. The other was that we, from day one, we started gathering data, so implementing various research projects. That's also critical. I mean, there's tons we don't know, and it's important to acknowledge that and to actively create knowledge and add to the knowledge base, and integrating, connecting with people in the academic and professional community who are respected. And once you connect to them and you show them the data, then you get them involved, and then that really helps the integration into the system. So at our psychedelic research unit, where we did some MDMA studies and ketamine, we very strategically picked one of the most published psychiatrists in Norway to collaborate with us on these research projects. And we've, that strategic approach that we took, and also being very evidence-based, was really successful. And we've come to the point where now, after having, fighting against the Psychiatric Association, just about a year ago, a year and a half ago, the current leader of the Norwegian Psychiatric Association said to us, on behalf of our field, I'm proud of what you guys are doing. And he, the leader of the Norwegian Psychiatric Association, is a co-supervisor on a group psilocybin study that we're planning here with the university. So it's a big change. We had a national ketamine conference about a year and a half ago, and it brought hundreds of doctors and psychologists and nurses together just about ketamine and mental health. And we're going to do that again in February in Oslo. And then we've got the other, and stop me if I'm going too long, but the big thing, there's a couple big things that are really important that are happening in Norway. And that's one, we were able to take, we developed a randomized controlled trial, which is a multi-site trial looking at 3 different arms of ketamine. That's going to take 9 hospitals in Norway. So all the major hospitals are going to participate. We're going to be doing this in the fall. And this randomized controlled trial, in order to do it, we have to train all these doctors and psychologists and make ketamine units. So we got funded about 25 million kroner to do this study from public funding. And it essentially implements ketamine into the public health system by going through a research study, right? So as soon as everybody's on board and doing it, they can start treating people, and it widely increases access. The other thing that's happening towards the end of the summer, a few years ago, we applied to the Medicines Agency to get reimbursement for ketamine treatment for depression. So this is important because when you use an off-label treatment, something not for anesthesia, if you use ketamine for anesthesia, you get paid for, but if you're using it for depression, you don't get it paid for. And then all the different hospital leaderships get to decide, well, we think, no, we're not going to let you do that. It's off-label and, we're not going to pay for that. Once the government says, yes, this is worth paying for, then it sort of opens up, makes it a lot easier for everybody to, in the public system, to start using it. So that report is going to come out. We sent in the application 4 years ago. The report is going to come out towards the end of the summer. And we expect it to be positive because we've got like 18 meta-analyses that support it. And I'd be highly surprised if they don't.
So it's almost time to invite Alexandra and to start talking a little bit more about Sweden. But first, I realized that I think we have to say something about the whole Spravato thing, since you're bringing up generic ketamine and reimbursement. Can you say something about Spravato?
Yeah. So real quick, so ketamine is a racemic 50-50 mixture of right-handed and left-handed ketamine. What we use is the 50-50 mix. It's generic, it's cheap. Johnson & Johnson, they basically decided that, okay, we can make a patent. The left-sided molecule is already generic and we use it in anesthesia. But if we stick it up our nose, they made a patent on the sticking it up your nose thing, which is a 2 kroner device that puts it up your nose. They got a patent. Then they can charge 8,000 kroner or so per dose. They made a treatment model where you dose, I think it's like twice a week for ever. And so it's a really expensive thing compared to what we're doing. The English sort of advisory panel, as I understand, the Swedish, the Norwegian, the Danish, and the Canadian all said that it's not really very cost effective based on the data that they submitted. It's not that cost effective. And 2, it appears to be, we don't know for sure, but it appears to be less effective than racemic ketamine. So you have something that's more expensive, less effective. Nobody really uses it. And there's some evidence that shows that it has less anti-suicidal effect than the racemic mixture as well.
And it doesn't, I mean, with the route of administration, it seems incompatible with a psychedelic approach.
Exactly. I mean, some clinics are using that, like in the US, in the US, insurance companies will pay for it. And so people will offer both. They'll say, look, I think you should do the racemic ketamine, but if you're going to get it for free from your insurance company to do the nasal spray, we can do that. And then they'll use the more, psychedelic informed model, and it can be a better experience. The problem is dosing is hard to adjust. And it's different time to time. So it's a little harder to titrate to a psychedelic dose for a patient, for an individual patient. And most people don't use it in that model anyway. They're just trying to minimize the side effects. And, you just sit in a waiting room with a whole bunch of other people and the TV is on and the lights, and you just kind of sit there a little spaced and dazed for an hour. And yeah.
All right. Thanks for doing a brief intro on that.
Yeah.
So I'd like to invite Alexandra now. Hello, Alexandra.
Hey.
Um,
Sorry.
um,
Thanks.
can you share something about yourself? Why are you here today?
Well, I was invited to come and talk to you, and because I'm working with the ketamine treatment in Swedish public healthcare in this more psychedelically informed way that Lowan was talking about earlier. And thank you, Lowan, for this excellent talk. And I'm so happy with what you're doing in Norway. It's awesome. Yeah.
So, Alexandra, can you tell us something about ketamine in psychiatry in Sweden in general? What's your impression of how it is being used?
Yeah. So I come from the same vision as Lowan, I think. But in Sweden, we've been working with ketamine since 2015, basically, because then it was in this big study compared to ECT. So ketamine and ECT was compared in a similar way in a big, a large, well done study in Skåne. But the way it was introduced was that it was sort of like ECT, so 3 times a week without preparation, intuition, nothing like that, and it had quite good antidepressant effect. About 40% responded or remitted, but there were lots of adverse events. So I think 21 out of 95 patients dropped out due to anxiety during the infusions. So this was like the background how ketamine came into Swedish healthcare system, and it was used in this way. And when we were going to introduce it in my hospital, I asked if we couldn't do it differently to lessen the side effects and reduce the anxiety. And my clinic agreed that we could use the more psychedelically informed way.
What sort of challenges do you see, Alexandra, in terms of introducing a ketamine in this more psychedelic model or a set and setting model in Sweden?
Okay, so having the resources, because treating patients with ketamine in a more biomedical way or in an ECT way takes less resources. Well, when the patients can be in the same room with just a nurse like monitoring them or watching over them, and they're just, or like Lowan said, sometimes even in a waiting room. So getting the clinics to accept that it might take a little bit more resources, but we're going to get more people through the treatment, and they're probably also going to have a better effect. But that's a problem to get the clinics to, because it's already low on some resources. So that's probably the biggest problem as I see it.
And have you been following the developments in Norway, and would you say that that has been an inspiration for you? Perhaps that's the leading question.
Yeah, well, the thing is that now Lowan came from the private sector and introducing it in this awesome way through research, which is really, really great. And I don't see that happening in Sweden. Like there's no private ketamine clinic, unfortunately, that can introduce this in the same way. But I think I think we can still use Norway as an inspiration, and hopefully we can just tag along and do what they do.
And can you share a little bit more about your way of working? Like how how many patients have you treated? How many, like, what sort of volumes are we talking here? And is this something that you are sort of learning as you go, or do you feel like you have your way of working set?
I'm learning. And I have Kyle Greenway as a supervisor, so I'm emailing him and calling him and asking him when I meet situations that are new to me. And we've now treated 16 patients, and they've been safe, and it's gone well, and we've seen some good effects, but it's also severely depressed patients, so they're sometimes hard to get the whole way.
And what kind of what does your protocol look like? Is it similar to what Lowan described for Axonklinikken?
Yeah, it's similar with the dosing sessions and the frequency, but at the moment we can't have like a separate psychotherapist or a psychologist, so we do most of the integration and preparation ourselves, the nurse, me, or near colleagues. And so we work with behavioral activation. I don't know if Lowan also works with that, the SMART goals, like working really on seeing this ketamine treatment as a window of an opportunity to change in your life. And that we try to say to the patients that this can help, but it can also help for a while. Then maybe you will feel more symptoms again. So use this window now as an opportunity to work on the things that you want to be working on but haven't had the energy or the capacity to do. So I think it's very similar to Badlow, and yeah, it's the Montreal model without the psychotherapy.
Nice. I'm so happy that this is happening.
Yeah.
Did you have much resistance when suggesting this?
Well, I think I'm lucky working in a small clinic with very close colleagues, and my boss is also like clinically working. So because of that is very small, and we all were very close. It was okay to try it out, and it's a supportive environment. I think it might be harder in the bigger clinics.
Where there's perhaps more hierarchy and more high profile bosses and stuff.
Yeah, that's what I think, but I don't know.
Yeah. Awesome. I have more questions, but I also see that we are beginning to have some questions in the Q&A, and I'm hoping to have many more, both for Lowan and for Alexandra. And personally, I think it's more fun when you ask the questions verbally. So I will try to like balance between giving the word to those of you using the raise hand function and taking the questions from the chat. So if you do raise your hand, I will give you the word, and then I need to enable your microphone, otherwise you won't be able to talk. But I will start with reading a question or two from the chat. So a question from Stefan, and I'll direct this to Lowan first. In the screening before the therapy, what are you looking for that is not beneficial for the treatment? So I'm interpreting that as exclusion criteria.
Yeah. Yeah, so I will say that so first of all, the protocol in the public system is available online. You guys, anybody can go to Sykehuset Østfold website and Google ketamine unit, Sykehuset Østfold, and our entire protocol in the public system is there with inclusion, exclusion criteria, everything. I will say that there's a lot there that is it's not really medical or psychiatric. It has to do with resources and sort of other things other than what is helpful or not helpful for the individual patient. So it really, the point is, it depends on the context. So different units have different inclusion, exclusion criteria. Some will only include people with treatment resistant, very strict treatment resistant depression. And then others will exclude different medical or psychiatric things because of lack of experience with those types of cases. In general, there's, the great thing about ketamine is we can pretty much give it to anybody safely. So, like I said, we give it to kids. My oldest patient was 97-year-old psychiatrist. So far, I've treated a lot of people in their 90s and their 80s. So it's a very safe medically medicine. There are some, to just sum it up in one short thing, it's the medical contraindications are really anything that, if you were to increase your blood pressure or heart rate by about 20 points, if that would be bad for that thing. So people with severe heart disease, other cardiovascular diseases, where you don't want to increase their blood pressure or heart rate. That's kind of the primary medical exclusion. With psychiatric exclusion criteria, it doesn't seem, or we don't have evidence yet, good evidence, that this is a treatment for any primary psychotic disorders. So it could both acutely exacerbate underlying psychosis, and it's just not a treatment for that we know of right now. But we do include people with bipolar 1 disorder who have had psychotic episodes, as long as they're not in this psychotic phase. And you can treat people with depression with psychotic features. We also don't usually include people with severe borderline personality disorder, or other, where the personality structure is their primary problem. It's not that they don't, there is, some evidence in clinical experience that these people can also benefit from the antidepressant effect of ketamine, but it doesn't treat that underlying disorder, although there is one study that has been done specifically for treating borderline personality disorder. But I could go on in details, but those are kind of the main things: psychotic disorders and bad heart disease.
And I'll ask you the same question, but on the opposite side of the spectrum. And this is I'm not asking for a scientific answer here, but rather your clinical intuition. Are there kinds of patients that when they come into the room, they start talking and you feel like, oh, this is a perfect patient for ketamine treatment?
Yeah, so unfortunately, so in terms of effect or no effect, so if I could just broadly say, it totally depends on what indication we're talking about, what type of disorder they have, but in general, it helps about 2/3 of people. The problem in general, we really don't have any good predictors of who is in that 1/3 that it doesn't help. I will say that in terms of, so that's like the acute effect. durability of the effect, like how this will be a long-standing change in their life, that they, you get them back on their feet. We can get a lot of people back on their feet, but the question is, will they fall down again? Right. And that's something that we can predict to some extent, which is, the landscape of your life. If you're in a really unstable, difficult situation, all this stuff, the wind of life is against you, and you don't have a lot of internal resources, you're less likely to benefit from, sort of to make use of the positive change that happens. So a type of person that would come, that I feel like really positive about their long-term prognosis, whether they have an effect or not, would be, somebody who's done the work. They've done psychotherapy before, so they kind of understand cognitively what they need to do. They have social support. They've got, they have the support around them to benefit from this. All sort of the external factors in their life going for them, but they're in a deep depression. And openness and is a characteristic that is, I think, a positive predictor as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll get into the next question. But I see no raised hands yet. So I'll take another one from the chat. And this one is a personal favorite of mine, actually, from Stefan again, who's asking, assisted versus non-assisted ketamine therapy. Is there any research on how these different forms differ in the outcome? Where has this research been made, if any? So I'd like to just add to this question that this is something that I discussed with Ulf Bromberg last webinar, but in the context of psychedelic therapy in general, we don't have any studies comparing like thorough psychotherapeutic support with none or very little. And this can, of course, this research can be done with ketamine as well, which is it's much easier to do such a study with ketamine. So is there any research actually comparing these models that we have been discussing this seminar?
Yeah, so not enough. No, there's very, very little. So there's not comparing. There are studies, I think there's about right now maybe 20, 25 studies of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy with various different types of psychotherapy. There's, a study at Yale showing that adding CBT on there was an indication that was helpful, as opposed to just doing ketamine without CBT. So I would say, so the short answer is there's very little data. There's a lot of real world clinical data, so big retrospective studies where, from many clinics that this is what we're doing and we're getting good outcomes. But there's no, randomized trials into randomized with or without that give us any good indication of, good studies supporting ketamine-assisted psychotherapy versus not, or saying which psychotherapies are clearly better than others. So it's still, there's incredible amount of work to be done. I will say that there was actually just a recent study published saying that they got when they did, so this was just recently, so they did a study where they did cap versus no cap in the same clinic, and they had similar outcomes. So ketamine infusion versus doing the psychotherapy with it. The problem is they didn't control for and didn't even ask the patients if they had a psychologist that they were seeing. So a lot of people that come to ketamine clinics in the US, they've been seeing a psychotherapist for a long time, or they continue to see them. And so we actually know nothing from that study, unfortunately. They said that in their clinic, if they did it or didn't do it, they got the same outcomes. But they didn't control for other psychologists. So, but what I would just comment on is that, so we need to do more research. I think intuitively and from clinical experience and from all the experience that we have, we know we know psychotherapy can be effective. We know ketamine alone can be effective. So there's going to be a synergistic effect. So I don't anticipate that anybody's going to prove that there's no benefit of also doing psychotherapy for the effect. But the point that I wanted to make was that there is a rapid antidepressant effect of ketamine independent of anything else that you do. So that does exist. And whether or not you get slightly better outcomes during the acute phase, I think that's actually less important than what is the long-term durability? What is the prognosis of that person over the course of the next year? Because that's where I think the psychotherapy is going to have the most impact, not on whether 24 hours later they, have a lower PHQ-9 score.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll give the word now to Anna, who has raised her hand. And you need to enable your microphone as well.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm curious about the development in Sweden. How do you see that? How do you foresee the future in Sweden, the proximate future? Maybe Alexander is the one I would be asking.
Well, I hope that more and more clinics will have a more psychedelically informed treatment. And well, I'm not sure how that will happen, but I hope maybe the people who are in this webinar and just by spreading the word, and also we're connecting more and more clinicians that are treating with ketamine. And I also see that like Örebro and Lund, that they've been treating with ketamine for 10 years now. They're changing a little bit and going a little bit more towards that the subjective experience might actually affect the outcome. And so I think that's where we're going. And I also want to add to the previous question that we are now setting up a trial where we're going to compare this more Montreal model setting, the psychedelically informed setting, compared to the more biomedically informed setting. So we are going to compare these two, and maybe that study will inform what we're doing, and maybe we can see that there are fewer side effects and possibly better outcomes, but we will see. And I think that's a start.
Thank you.
So that got me really curious, the trial that you're setting up, Alexandra. Is it funded?
Yeah, partly from our research unit at the hospital, yes. But we're still in the protocol, so we're not there.
Yeah. And do you have any thoughts on expectancy effects in terms of,
Yes.
yeah.
So much, yeah. So we're going to try to measure the expectancy and see how that affects treatment outcome. Was that your question? Yeah. It's so interesting, like how much it can affect and what it says about it. But I don't have any answers, just many questions around it.
But what would be your, I mean, my speculation would be that with preparation, you are boosting the expectancy effects somewhat, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a thing.
Yeah, I think so. I think that we will do that, but nobody has ever measured it, so we don't know. So we wanna measure it and see both how much it boosts, like if we explain the Montreal model and how that works, and if we also explain in a similar way how it works biomedically to two different patients, how much will they believe in the treatment and how much will it affect the outcome. But there are so many factors, so it's hard to know what is what.
Yeah, it's just it's like such an interesting landscape to be in terms of the biomedical model, because some researchers, clinicians would say that, well, expectancy effect, that's not an effect. That's just irrelevant stuff. But then if you ask a psychotherapist, for example, how they work when they're outside of biomedicine, then placebo and expectancy and is something that is really important. If you think that you will succeed, you're more likely to make changes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and in the real world, things aren't blinded in the real world. We don't give people blinded medicine, in clinical practice. People know what they're going to get and they expect it. And those placebo effects or expectancy are harnessed and magnified. And it certainly is important to try to divorce what is what and do that research, but ultimately it comes down to a person who is suffering and how can we heal this person. And if we can get 70% response on somebody who's been suffering for years, it's less relevant to that patient. The most important thing is to have a good positive outcome. And I would just a quick comment. I don't know if you guys read, there was a recent analysis of psychedelic trials versus SSRIs, if they only include unblinded. So if you compare non-blinded psychedelic trials to non-blinded antidepressant trial, I don't remember if it was specifically SSRIs, and they were actually relatively similar, as opposed to comparing it to the blinded studies. So it's an interesting landscape, but and lots of exciting stuff for us to research.
Yeah, I look forward to reading that one. So a question in the chat from Marwa. I hope I pronounced that correctly. As a psychology student, I'm very interested in working with psychedelic assisted therapy after graduation. Unsure what to do in Sweden to be able to do that. Any tips or leads on where to start? I'll start by passing the word to you, Alexandra, and then I'll add something.
Well, I'm not coming from a psychologist background myself, so I think you maybe have a better answer, Philip, but I think that being interested and just like asking around, and so ketamine is a good starting point. So when you are in a clinic, ask if they are giving ketamine treatment, and if you can go there and see what's happening and talk to the clinicians working with it and inform them about the studies, and maybe there will be an opening. Just like it's go for it.
Yeah, my general advice would be to get involved in what is happening. There's a psychedelic conference in Stockholm in September called Borealis. We'll all be there, I think. Will you be there, Alexandra?
I will be there.
Yeah. Become a member of the Swedish Network for Psychedelic Science, start a journal club, and also get to know people in your institution, like who of your teachers and which researchers in your institution are interested in psychedelic research. See if you can write your thesis on related to psychedelic research. Could be ketamine, or it could be on there's a lot of data, including from Nysna, that are doing retreats in the Netherlands. So there are quite good opportunities now for example, writing your thesis on psychedelics. Yeah. Also, of course, you can take a course with Lavin. We have student discount. But yeah, and be aware that it might take a few years, both for you to get more established and for psychedelic therapy to be more available. So be patient. And also another standard answer, get like become good at therapy. Don't start with psychedelic therapy. If you want to work with MDMA assisted therapy for trauma, learn trauma therapy. If you want to work with psilocybin for depression, get really good at depression treatment. Yeah, find your niche. Yeah, I think that's
I would agree with all that, and I would put extra emphasis on what you just said. Like, so many people ask, how do I get into psychedelic science, or psychedelic treatment, and it's become a psychologist, become a doctor, become a psychiatrist, whatever, do that, do it well, and at the same time learning and meeting people, staying aware of what's going on in the field, and also volunteer for any studies that are going on. They take an incredible amount of work. You even do like a 10 patient thing, and it's like takes years and years. We always need people to volunteer for different aspects of that. So just get involved. Yeah.
All right. I have no questions in the chat and no raised hands. Do we have anyone who is sitting with a question? Then I will ask a question. So for Alexandra, perhaps primarily, but then also Lowan. Last webinar with Ulf, I asked him to bring out his I don't even know what to call it, framtidskikare, and say something about the future. And he said, well, I think it's quite likely that psilocybin gets approved in 2027 if Compass Pathways phase 3 trials are successful. And so my question is, Alexandra, do you think that what do you think we need to do in order to administer psilocybin in a clinic such as yours in 2 years' time? Is it possible?
In 2 years' time, sorry to say, I don't believe that it will happen in 2 years' time, but maybe double that. But I think we need to see more research before that, and I don't know. I think it would be, because now all research is sort of on treatment-resistant depression, and that's probably what it would be approved for. And I would like to see more data on like depression, maybe it's like not treatment-resistant depression, because that's, I think that would be interesting to see more there. Yeah.
Thank you. Lowan, what would you add, or what are your thoughts on this matter?
Yeah, I would say realistically, I mean, these things are coming. Psychedelics will be integrated into mental health globally, plus or minus, some different places, but this is happening. It's not happening as fast as everybody thinks it is. These things take time, unless, I mean, there could be some, and there are pockets, of course. We've got Australia, we got the Czech Republic, who knows what's going to happen in the US. Things are uncertain day to day on many levels, but I think all this excitement about, it's gonna just a couple of years, then we're going to be using MDMA in the clinics, and Compass and MAPS, or everything's going to be approved. I think we're looking at like a 5-year window for approval in Europe, at least. But I would say in 5 years, what I expect and hope to see, throughout our area of the world, is that really good ketamine-assisted psychotherapy units are, it's part of the healthcare system in the Nordics, and I would say that the thing about both psilocybin and MDMA is that they may be leapfrogged by the other shorter acting agents like ketamine that are in the approval pipeline. So, for example, Atai just bought Beckley Scitech, which with 5-MeO DMT, which is very short. And if you can get the same outcome in an hour with DMT than you can get with psilocybin in 6 hours, then that's what people are going to be used. That's what's going to be implemented. So, and I think that goes for short acting entactogens as well. Like, David Nutt is working on a short acting MDMA like substance. And if those go through the phase 3 process relatively quickly, and there's a lot of money to make those happen, my sense is that those may be the ones that we actually implement, particularly in the public health system.
So patience, in other words.
Yeah, well, no, I don't think, I mean, patience for the other stuff, but aggressive work to implement ketamine in the meantime.
Yeah.
And get the experience, and let us try to figure out all these unknowns, because the same unknowns exist for really all of these. they all have their unique specifics, but in general, that we need the same infrastructure in place. We need the same type of units. We need the same multidisciplinary teams, similar resources, and the same types of training programs for all of them.
And another interesting aspect of this that I think of when you talk is that these are commercial venture capital actors that are working to implement, well, Compass Pathways, Beckley Scitech, Atai. They are venture capital financed companies, and so there's a worry there that profit will come to the expense of patients' well-being. With generic ketamine, you don't have that problem. Still, I mean, commercial interest is going to be an issue for the whole field, of course. I mean, Axonklinikken is a private actor, but it is comforting, at least, that generic ketamine is available.
Yeah, and I would say that I think the best thing that we can do is just transparency and to talk about these things. I think that definitely the psychedelic field, and I think in general, the broader medical field is quite aware of these mixed incentives that are in place with the pharmaceutical industry. So, we talk about this quite a lot, and you take things with a grain of salt. Studies that are funded by a for-profit company. But on the other hand, we wouldn't have any of this without, like, innovation is not coming out of the public health system in Norway or Sweden. It's not happening. So innovation is happening in, coming from other places. And not to say, of course, some innovation happens, but so there's pros and cons, and but we need to, the data that gets developed, we need to scrutinize it. And, that's the good thing about kind of peer-reviewed literature and saying, how the study is sponsored. But yeah, ultimately, I think, I think there's definitely some positive aspect to people with money actually funding this field, that has made a lot of the research happen. But there's plenty of bad actors out there, and it's part of the reality. We just need to be aware of it.
Thank you. So we are over time. I have a couple of questions in the chat, but I think we'll need to wrap it up here. So I want to thank both of you so much for joining us, and thank you for the work that you are doing. We are taking a summer break, so there's no webinar in July, but we will be back in August. So thank you all for joining us. Have a beautiful evening.
Thank you, Philip. It was amazing to be talking with you as always, and it was lovely to speak with you, Alexandra, and I look forward to how the study pans out.
Thank you. Thank you for everything.